some models. Erica, do you want to tell us a little, like, we have this new data in our data warehouse. How much do you know about this data ticket tailor dot orders?
I don't really know much.
That's very good, because I know a little bit about it. So ticket tailor is a event ticketing system that we use to sell tickets to DBT Learn. And so it has 3 different tables. Raw.ticketTailor.orders, I believe, is the first one, and I've already got a really bad error. So like start from raw.ticketTailor.orders. We've got some orders, we have some issued tickets, and we have some events. So I think we're all pretty familiar with, you know, the idea of ticket sales and events and orders, and we can sort of figure out how those 3 different tables relate to each other. So select stuff from raw ticket tailor events. I've got this zoomed in just so that people can see it a little better, but it does mean we can't see a ton in this console here, but you know, we're making do. So I'm looking at this data and I can already see a few strange things. How do you feel about this created at column?
I don't know about that. As a stakeholder, Claire, that's not very useful to me.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't really know what time zone that's in, but I think we'll figure it out. What about these amounts? So this is like usually the first thing we do is just look at the data and see what the strange things are. Are we selling tickets to our training course at $90,000 and $180,000? I think we'd have much nicer offices if that was the case. So we can start to build a little bit of intuition that maybe our amounts are in the wrong unit, or a unit that doesn't make sense when you first glance at it. We've got some extra columns here. We've got some foreign keys, some stitch columns, like metadata columns, a whole bunch of different things. So the first step that I usually do when working with a brand new data source is go straight in and define these as sources in my DBT project. So models, I've still got these floating around. Oh, I need to create a new branch though. Live coding. Submit. Can't work on the main branch because we want to make sure we're putting our work on another branch. We're just having fun today. Okay, I'm going to get rid of these example models and then we can start building. So new file, models. I'm going to put it in a folder called staging and then another folder called ticket tailor. So this project doesn't have anything else in it, but as we add data sources over time, we're going to have like a very bloated, not bloated, but a very big project. And so we're already thinking about like, how can we organize these things so that it is extensible when we add more data sources. So models staging kind of means like everything that's organized by data source. The next is the name of the data source, and then src underscore ticket tailor dot YML. Okay. Let's open that up. Now, I know this syntax off by heart, but there's also docs on this as well. So version 2, sources, name, ticket tailor, database, raw, tables, name, orders, name, issued, tickets, name, events. So these are the 3 tables that like my data engineer has said to me, hey, I've just synced these into the data warehouse, and I'll save that. So before we're doing select star from raw.ticketTailor.orders, and we can see sort of like the database is raw, the schema is ticket tailor, and the name is orders. Okay, so far so good. We now have sources in our project. If I save this and do like a dbt docs generate, we'll actually already see these pop up in our DBT project, hopefully. Erica, what would be the next step that you typically do?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was on mute. And so after we've added all of our sources, then I would like to create staging tables for each of these, where it is a one-to-one of just like gussying up your current like orders issued, events, and just like making it a little tidier, reformatting in the way that like you want it to be. And yeah,
absolutely. Our coworker Jeremy once said like the point of a staging model is to put the data in the format you wish it was in when you originally received it. And I think that's a very good mental model for what staging model should be. Like, we have no control over the fact that the ticket tailor data comes in with a strange timestamp, but we don't want it to be that way. And so we're going to use this staging layer to clean that up as we go. So new file, staging, ticket tailor, stage, ticket tailor. I'm going to work with orders first, .sql. So this is how I like to name things: stg underscore name of the source, double under name of the table. And okay, so we're going to work on this staging model. And we have a pretty particular structure for staging models. We usually do something like with source as select star from source ticket tailor orders, renamed as select star from renamed, select from source, and we'll go through every single column and list it out, clean it up, rename it, like for all the columns that we want to keep. So we'll say like, oh, oops, sorry, wrong tab. Created at. We want to cast that to a timestamp. It's actually in a format called like seconds since epoch, so the number of seconds since the 1st of Jan 1970. But Snowflake is able to figure out to timestamp and sort of cast it. So we're going to do, with Snowflake, you can just use the to timestamp function, and you don't need to do anything more complicated than that. It recognizes that time format. So things like that, we might want to, what was that amount we were looking at where it was kind of funny, refund amount, this number is too large. And so doing this manually can look a little bit like that, like going through every single column, listing it out and cleaning up as we go. One thing that we do when we're working with a ton, we need to build like a lot of staging models really quickly, is use a package to do this, to automate as much as possible code. So wherever there's repeated code, it's a good like heuristic to think about, is there a way that I can automate this, or is there someone else that has already automated some of this? And in this case, we can see like this structure of this staging model is very repeated. If we're going to do this just for orders, but if we were going to do it for events and for issue tickets, we would keep repeating this structure where we have like this CTE, the renamed CTE, and then this final select statement. So I'm not going to go too deeply into what this package does, but just know that this is a thing that you can do. Packages.yaml, if I spell it correctly. I'm a fantastic typer when I'm not sharing my screen. I promise everyone that. Put that there. dbt steps. Staying very surface level here, but if there's a thing that's interesting to you, definitely check out dbt CodeGen, look at the docs on packages, and you can learn a little bit more about this. It's just taking a second. Which is a good moment for me to. Erica, were there any questions coming through on the chat?
Nope. So far, so good.
Okay, there we go. So I'm going to do something pretty cool. CodeGen, generate base model, ticket tailor, events. That should actually have quotes as well. No, we were doing orders. Silly me. And then hit this compile SQL button. And this is an error because I put a quote in the wrong place. So this is a macro that gives us back a scaffold for staging models. So but we can see that's very similar to the code I was writing manually, but theoretically is much faster if I'm sort of go straight to this solution and have to do it many times over. So I can take this generated code, copy it, and put it straight in here. I'm going to save that. And then we start to go through and we can do some cleaning up. So first of all, ID is usually the first column. We don't like the name ID. We tend to instead call it like order ID because it's less ambiguous. created at is like, then we put all of our timestamps at the bottom, just because we know we need to cast that already. So this is a pretty iterative process. You like are looking at your data, you're running queries on it. I don't need like this metadata in my DBT models. I'm going to run this SQL.
I think you want it to be as.
Oh, thank you.
23. Yeah.
So we can start to say, okay, that's better named. We've got this currency field, which is pretty interesting. It's got a base multiplier and a code of USD. So that could be useful. One thing that as I'm like working with the data and cleaning it up, I start to think about what are the assumptions that I'm making about my underlying data source as I write this code. For example, I would assume that this ID column is unique and not null. And every time I identify an assumption that I'm making, I actually, as much as possible, put these tests on my sources. So if I could just type. Oh, Erica, typing is so hard.
You're doing a great job.
Tests, unique, not null. So here I actually added this test directly to the source because it's an assumption about my underlying data rather than kind of like my transformation. It's a little bit different to how you might be used to adding tests, but that's like, I try to push my tests as upstream as possible. So save that, and I go, okay, that's that ID cleaned up. We tend to put our any other foreign keys next. So transaction ID, I looked that up in the API docs. This currency object has some really interesting information in it. We probably want to split that out a little bit. So I'm going to do currency is multiplier integer as currency base multiplier and currency code string as currency code. And as I type this, I'm thinking to myself, like we sell all of our tickets in USD, right? Like we don't, if we started selling things in pounds or Australian dollars, then I need to change how I model this data, because if I have, say, like a sum on this table and I'm summing together two different currencies, then that sum doesn't really make any sense anymore. And so when I see this data, I think, okay, to me, everything looks like it's USD. I've made an assumption about it. So it's a good point. It's a good moment to think about how do I test that assumption. So as I'm cleaning up, keep thinking about assumptions and putting them in as tests. So in this case, I could test the underlying currency field on the data source, but I'm actually just going to test the model because they're like, this is like nested in another field and it's kind of hard to test. So I'm just going to do that. So new file, stg ticket tailor.yaml. Do version 2 models name stg ticket tailor orders. I want 2 spaces there. Columns name currency code. I'm going to use an accepted values test here, but just give it like one acceptable value. So accepted values. I want that to always say, is it USD upper or lower actually? Lowercase. Okay, that's not the ISO standard, but that's what our data has. And so I put a test here, and that way if we start selling tickets in other currencies, I'll get a failure and I'll have to probably do a fair amount of work to change all of my reports to account for that, but at least I know about it as quickly as possible. So I'm going to save that. Okay, event summary has a few interesting things in here. It's kind of, just because I've zoomed in, it's a little hard to read, but we can also see it here, I think. So if I put my cursor there, I can see that I have an event ID, and that feels like it's going to be a relevant ID for me to pull out. So even though like we have this idea of like primary key first, foreign key second, I'm going to do event summary. Event ID, was it? Or just ID? Then we look at maybe our refund amount. An interesting thing here is that like all of our tickets have a full refund amount, which doesn't feel right to me. So I'm just going to jot this down and say like, why are all tickets refunded? Because like I know that's not the case. And this is the benefit of working with data where you have a bit of context about what your business is doing. You sort of can say like, well, no, I'm part of DBT Learn. I teach it. I know we don't have that many tickets we've had to refund. So something is wrong in my data here and it's worth exploring at a later time. And I also know that we don't sell tickets for $90,000. And so I think I want to use this currency-based multiplier to start to clean that up. So currency code amounts, we'll do like refund amount here divided by currency-based multiplier. Refund amount, and there should be a total and a tax and a subtotal, and those all feel like amounts. So I'm going to do the same. Can I multi-cursor here? I think I can.
Yeah.
Shift? No. Option? Yeah. As I do this. Oh, how do I tried.
I think you could do like control or like
some combination of those keys and the like. I thought that was pretty close. Who needs macros when you can multi-cursor, which I'll take a little about in a moment.
That's a chaotic take, Claire.
So this like very iterative process of looking at your data, like noticing things that seem strange, trying to clean them up, trying to put things in as tests, and as you go documenting like the discoveries that you make about your data. In fact, I was playing around with this data earlier and I found out that this data had stopped syncing. We just like hadn't received, we've sold tickets to our events recently. And I know that because I have a Ticket Tailor login. I was going to try and like true up our numbers against our Ticket Tailor dashboard. And I couldn't because we didn't have any recent records. And so then once I realized that, I was like, oh, we should put like a freshness test on this data. So loaded at field is remember what I actually put in here. Let me check what it was. Select star from source. Good. Taylor. So this like idea of just like getting to know your data really well and making sure that you like codify that knowledge, any discoveries you make in terms of tests, in terms of descriptions, in terms of notes left to other people. I actually went back into our internal project and made sure I added that test, but also put a note to say like this tap is deployed in a kind of strange way. And so if you need to debug it, contact this person and here's the link to it in our extract and load tool, just to make that process easier for the next person because I found out something strange about it. So I think we want something SDC received. I could put like a freshness test here. On after 12 period day 14. So if we don't receive a new record in the last 14 days, then there's some sort of issue going on. I made that quite big because maybe we don't sell tickets every single day, so pretty big threshold there. So as I'm writing this and sort of using this interface to just look at my data and clean it up, once I get it to a pretty good state, I'll try and build this as a model. So I'll do dbt run. Hopefully it works. There's going to be an error somewhere. Oh, it worked. Cool. So once I've built it, I can then run all my tests and see if those assumptions I was making about my data were true, are true, I guess. No. Oh, it's not 3 C's and accepted. Stage ticket Taylor. One less C. There we go. But my uniqueness test passed, so that's really good. So I've got my accepted values, didn't work. Let's rerun that and go from there. So this is what it would normally look like to just get in there, add new sources to your project, and start cleaning the data up. From here, what we typically do next is try and true up our data. I think Eric and I both did a lot of client work when we were first at Fishtown Analytics, and it's amazing like how often someone already has the number for this. Like someone already knows this is how much we sold in tickets in the last 4 weeks. And so it's really important to find like who already knows that number, what do they think that number is, and how close can I get to that number? Because otherwise you're going to build a report and your stakeholder is going to look at it and say, this doesn't match my number, I'm not using it. And then all the work that you did like wasn't that valuable. So that's sort of the order I go in, is clean up the data, check to see if we can true it up, to see if there's any like big discrepancies. In this case, we couldn't true it up when I was playing around with this because we were missing data. So then I'd be going back to our data engineer and saying, hey, what's happening here? And then once you're sort of confident in the cleanliness and quality of your data, that's when we start to think about, okay, what are the final like marts models that we want to build? So something like ticket sales is really good. Maybe we haven't always used Ticket Tailor to sell tickets. There's a lot of tickets in there. And so we need to union together Eventbrite data and Ticket Tailor data into one master table. What are the different dimensions we want to build? Maybe it's attendees, event attendees, students, something like that. All these like business definitions, and what are the things that like our stakeholders want to report on from a business perspective is like the next level of things. And it's kind of a whole different process. But so basically the first thing we do, add sources, clean up the data, check that we're getting close to the real numbers. And then we get into the like design and sort of what is the final thing that we're building stage once our data is clean, simply because it's so much easier to rebuild those, like to build those reports once your create that column is in the right time format. Otherwise you'll be casting it, a dozen times or dividing that refund amount by 100 every single time just so that you can get that number correct. Okay. Any questions that came through in my last minute?
It seems that all of the questions have been answered. Let me just double check.
Oh, wow. Thank you to whoever's in there.
Thank you to Vila and Andrew for holding it down in the Slack channel.
MVPs.
Truly.
I do realize that I went pretty quickly, so I was sort of hoping that would happen, that there'd be like replies in the threads. If you're watching this later, pop into the Slack channel and recreate the chat. So I'm going to leave it here for now. Obviously, I would need a few more hours to get this whole project finished, but we just wanted to start it off and show you what that looks like for us. From here, I'm going to find my stop share button. Hey, I found it. And I'm going to pass over to Andrew, and I'll be in the passenger seat for a little bit here, who is going to check out some of the work that I did previously. So sort of here's one I prepared earlier, and look at building a macro for us.
Okay, I think I got us in order, in theory. So I saw the comment on the chat that the faces kind of cover that lower part. So we're going to work with maybe a smaller screen. I don't know if this is small enough, but I think close enough that we can still see the command line, at least in my screen. So if someone just give a thumbs up or something, but otherwise I think we'll be good.
It's pretty good for me. The other thing is if it's overlapping at home, you can stretch your screen a little bit and it will help with that.
Oh, sweet. That works too. Cool. So just like what Claire said, I'm going to jump in and nope, not what I want to look at, but maybe one of the staging tables. And so now we want to figure out like what can we do with some macros and make this a bit fancier, and not just fancier, but also easier for everyone else to interact with. So let me pull up maybe one of the last things. Trying to remember, Claire, what was that one that we were most interested in? Was it this issued tickets?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, so let me just try running this and getting the results.
Cool.
back again.
Set it up a little better. But while you're running that, so yeah, one of the things that when we were cleaning up this data is we found all of our IDs were prefixed, and that just felt like unnecessary to us. IT for issue ticket, TT for ticket type, EV for event. And so we thought, like, why don't we just truncate the ID and strip out that first part? And I was supposed to do that in my cleaning part, but I think Andrew's going to have that covered.
Yeah, and we found that this is a bit of an inconvenience, not because of anything. So what we did like a lot about this is that we know, without even looking at this header, let's just say, I don't know, I was blocking it and I'm blocking it with my hand, but obviously no one can see this. But if that was blocked out, I would know just with the prefix itself what this is referring to and what that ID is referring to. And that's super useful in the data modeling world, where half the time you don't have a fully functioning ERD that actually describes what's going on with your data. And so these hints help you get somewhere along the way in terms of knowing where these things join up. But what Claire and I discovered as we explored the data more was when we were trying to reconcile the records with what was in the Ticket Tailor website itself, there was an ID that existed in the domain, but the IDs on the domain didn't have any of the prefixes. And so you can imagine in an operations perspective, if I start surfacing this ID to dashboards and end users are trying to reconcile the data back and forth with maybe your source data like Ticket Tailor and trying to figure out if, was this record really refunded, as what Claire mentioned earlier? Like, it looks like all the tickets are refunded. Maybe we have like a dashboard that people can use to visualize and verify refunds. It's kind of a pain if I jump in here, copy paste. And if you guys have done that workflow of jumping back and forth and copying from your dashboard and pasting, it will be quite painful if you get, all these extra stuff. And this is a tiny thing. Like, it's definitely a quality of life change. But if we could make that a bit easier for everybody, that would kind of be perfect. So it's good to have it maybe in like the modeling perspective when you're trying to understand the data more. But once you want to surface it to end users, it would be kind of cool if we could strip that out. So what would we do? Naively, not thinking about macros, you would just go in here and do something like, I think it's a string, split? I forget already.
Split, was it split part?
Yeah, split part.
I'll look up the docs.
I got it. I think, yep, split part. And like the interesting part here is that this is also handled, I think, quite differently depending on what warehouse you have. So I know split part sounds a lot similar to, I think Python also calls it split part in pandas. I could be wrong. I could be completely lying here. But if you know, and it kind of depends on what warehouse you're running. And this is another good reason why it could, in fact, make its way later into a macro, because you want to abstract away that thinking and just make it easier for your entire team not to worry about it. So I'm guessing here. But I'm guessing the first argument is the column. The second might be the delimiter. And the last would be like which part. So if I were to split this by the underscore as the delimiter, then I'm guessing part 1 is TT and part 2 is 13357, whichever. I'm looking at the wrong thing altogether, ticket ID, but we get the gist. I think it's my guess, right? And it's my guess fueled by
split part
me prepping. Yeah.
Map.
Sweet. So we have ticket ID. And as what Claire said, there's multi-cursor, so I can just go in. And because Claire did the neat trick of organizing all the IDs up top, it's super easy for me to jump in here and just like multi-cursor my life through this. But as you might guess, this is all a preempt to the actual solution of, oh no, I can't get myself in order here, of building, I've coding everybody, of ideally just creating a macro to solve our problem here. But just to prove our point, that should work with some multi-cursor magic. I could also be completely wrong, but yeah, it looks about right. So again, why would you, this is perfectly fine to one degree, but it's also kind of messy. At least it looks a bit messy to me. The messiness is one piece, but the other piece is, again, as I mentioned earlier, if someone were to create a new data source, and this is Ticket Tailor, I know for a fact that Stripe does the exact same pattern where they prefix it. So let's say a new analytics engineer in your team came in and was tasked to model the new Stripe data you guys have, or you all have. you're now going to be forced to redo this process. And they could very much not know that split part exists because maybe they were previously more experienced with BigQuery, Redshift, and the like, and would find another janky way, because there's a couple ways that you can do this in Snowflake. And so to abstract that piece and just make it easy for everybody, it would be nice if we could just package this in a macro. The macro, for those who don't know, are just abstraction sort of functions, as you might call it, in dbt that you can create yourself and then reuse in different pieces of the project. So the way you do that is you jump into the macros folder, aptly named, and then create a new file. And we would just call it, what did we call it? I don't know, split drop prefix. Drop prefix, ID prefix, maybe to be more specific. .sql. And it's also a SQL file, just like all the other things. And then this is a beta feature, so please don't get mad if it doesn't work for you all. And please ping me and let me know if it doesn't work, and then we can try to solve it. But if you double underscore
at Andrew parentheses Fishtown Analytics.
Fishtown Analytics on Slack. But I love using this feature, but also so far it looks to be 50-50. But if you do double underscore, you can do this with ref, and you can also do this with double underscore macro, and that will scaffold the macro for you. And the way a macro is defined is just by having this percent or curly percent macro, the name, the argument, and then the end of that macro block. So we like to call our macros the exact same thing that the file is called, just so that when someone sees your macro in the code and they're trying to look in the macros folder, it's very easy for them to locate where it could be found. So drop, oh no, ID prefix, not if prefix.
Perfect.
And then we would say like ID column, right? Whatever you want to name it. And we would take one of our samples here and just copy it over. Right? Yeah, and then this would just be ID column with curly braces. Oops. So for those who aren't familiar with or too experienced with Jinja, excuse me, we like to think of curly percent as entering Jinja land. You're doing something in the context of Jinja, and we like to think about double curlies as like you're taking a value from Jinja land and manifesting it in the SQL world. If this is all too confusing, I think we have our dbt learn course, the on-demand course on some Jinja and macros that we'd love for you guys to check out too. But for now, take my word for it. I promise it's not a lie.
And maybe at Coalesce 2022, when we're all vaccinated, we'll have a theme park called Gingerland.
Gingerland, exactly. With like mountains and castles and everything. And then so you can swap this out instead. Oh no, this is all going not as planned, but we would do double curlies and then call the macro instead. So instead of doing this whole set of things here, you would use drop ID prefix. And then every time you call something in a macro, you have to put parentheses. Did I get that right? Single.
Yeah. I'm so impressed with your ability to like select a whole word. I was not doing well on that.
Command D is another way. Command D or Control D if you're in Windows is a way to multi-select the same thing, similar to VS Code. So if I press run SQL, we should get the exact same. Nope. If anyone caught that, I didn't close the macro at the end. Save. Oh, and this is poor usage. We should have as on all of these.
I was going to tell you when you pull a request, but
Andrew and his misleading renaming. Let me cancel this out. I know I caught myself in a bad state. I may have saved and pressed enter at the exact same time again. As old habits die hard. So let me copy paste everything and refresh.
I think we have code retention turned on for this account. So
yeah, there we go. And I think we just recently have it turned on for all accounts. So
really?
Yeah, if you ever press command refresh by accident, as what I always do, and lost all your code before, I think that's of the days of future past. X-Men reference.
I guess we'll be able to confirm whether that's rolled out or not.
Yeah, someone correct me in our chat if spreading lies. But I believe we've broadened that. Sweet. So it looks like it worked. And if you look at the compiled SQL, it's exactly what you expect. That same split part, event ID, and all that jazz. So this kind of gets us to a pretty good place. I think the next step I would do here is I would go to the rest of the models and just make sure that all of those other IDs have it stripped as well. And everyone else is back to a good state where we have that stripped out. And you can imagine there's a very simplified example of how you would use a macro to do some cleanup, but it's good to abstract away something that people could arbitrarily do in many different ways and standardize it for your organization. Another one we have in the docs that we really like is converting cents to decimals. And often that involves determining like how many decimal places are accepted for your amounts. We love this example because often the finance team in your organizations will determine how many decimals are relevant for reporting purposes. And often that can change. You can go from like 4 decimals down to 2 or the reverse. And centralizing that in a single macro where your finance team can just change one variable, changes it for all your finance reporting downstream. So other good use cases of macros. And I think in the chat earlier, someone posted their example of how they use a macro to repeat code across many different models. So feel free to take a look at that one.
Nice. Andrew, how do you feel about building a schema test?
Absolutely. I'm ready. I'm ready to jump in the deep end. I think that's an event.
Yeah.
So there was another thing that Claire and I discovered. Maybe you want to tee it up, Claire, while this is running.
Yeah. So when I was looking at this events table, all of our events were named dbt learn : something. And I thought, oh, it might be good to test, like I put a test on that because I'm going to be using this data to power like some reports around how many learn tickets we're selling. But what happens if we start selling tickets to another event type on there? So we want to check like, is every record in here prefixed with dbt learn as kind of a way of checking that we're not suddenly selling different tickets through this platform, which would mess up all of our accounting.
Yeah. So I was going to say one way we could do this, Claire, would just be to go into tests, right? And then write like a SQL, a raw SQL query. Let's do, what's it called? What do we call it? Test prefix.
I always call it like assert for some reason. I find that's a more assert name prefix. I don't know.
That makes sense. And then we could write something where select, oh, do we do a with here? We could, but it's a simple query. We don't have to do it, I guess. Select star from _ref. Do staging. Already forgot what the name of this model was.
Ticket tailor stage ticket tailor double under events.
There we go.
Yeah.
Where I think the name was the column name. Let's go back to that. Where it's just name. Where name, to get the first prefix, we can just do an like not I like. Oh nope. What's it again? DBT.
DBT
Learn colon.
Yeah.
%. So it doesn't matter what comes after as long as it starts with this. Is there any record there that has it? Oh, error?
Maybe we haven't built these.
Oh, I'm pretty sure I ran this. Nope, I lied. So we'll just run this really quickly. It's a good error on DBT's part to just scream at me and tell me I'm not doing my job correctly. Sweet. Okay, we have events.
I had these visions of live coding from my kitchen and then being like, oh, here's what I prepared earlier, and opening the oven and pulling out some paper with printed off DBT models. Maybe one day.
So I think this should work, right, Claire? This is
Yeah,
technically a valid test.
Here's a data test. Data test, we want to return 0 records. And there's a slight nuance when we switch over to building a schema test, we want to return the number 0. So this works perfectly. If we were to type dbt test -- data, we would see it pass.
You get this right? Or -m?
No, -- data. Yeah. That just runs any tests in that test directory as opposed to any of the tests that you add via YAML.
There we go. So it passed. So we got no records back, meaning nothing failed our assumption. Now, this works, but let's say and obviously this is a session on macros, and this does not look like a macro at all for everybody. So there's a bit more to this. And maybe someone comes back to you in your team and was like, hey, this is a super cool pattern. Can we do this for like, I don't know, 5 other columns with 5 different prefixes? And like your first knee-jerk reaction is, yeah, I can't duplicate quite yet in the IDE, but I could copy and then make a new file and then paste. And we already know like this feels a bit painful and it probably isn't the way to go. So if you find yourself in this pattern where there's maybe value in testing the prefix of certain fields, maybe it's not just names, maybe it's, I don't know, going back to IDs, maybe you wanted to test the prefix of IDs, maybe we didn't want to drop it. I guess that's a counter narrative to the first.
Oh shoot, what's that called when there's a column a polymorphic relationship where it could point to, say it's like a transaction ID
different things, and then there's
one's is that polymorphic? Right. I think it is.
I don't know if the term's right. Someone correct us in chat. This feels like a Twitch streamer moment. But in any case, if it were a table like that, exactly, Claire, and then you had like a type and a value breakdown of that, and then you had different values, you want to be alerted early on that that's actually how your table's operating and the prefixes aren't there. So the way we'd convert this is to go back to your macros folder. And Claire already introed us to some of these concepts in the staging YAML, where, hey, we could actually test automatically. Oh, that's not going in my favor. Unique and not null. Can we possibly create another test that tests the prefix of values? And the answer is absolutely. So you would come into macros, you'd create a new file here. And the special thing with schema tests, and by special we mean kind of funny but also very effective, is you have to prefix it with the word test. And so now we'll call it test has prefix, maybe. Someone in chat let us know if they have a better name for this. But we want to create a generalized test that just tests whether that prefix exists and if it is true. This feels descriptive enough to me. And you do the exact same format. Double underscore macro. Same thing. You want to name it the exact same thing. Test underscore has prefix. That way, when people see this pattern, they know where to find it. And then you would have a couple arguments here. By default, dbt is actually going to add model and column name for you. But we'd like to just put it just to be extra explicit. So when people try to look at your macro, they understand what's going on and they know what variables are involved. And then prefix would be your last, or maybe not prefix, maybe string, like the string pattern, maybe string underscore pattern of your prefix. And then we would take that same macro or that same query and just kind of change it up a bit. So just like what Claire said, when you're doing tests in these data tests, you want to return rows. But in schema tests, you're actually trying to return counts instead. So we would just convert that to a count star instead. Your from will just be the model. So the current model you're referencing. We'll show you a bit later how this pans out. And then where, we'll call on column name. I like same thing, but instead of this, we will now instead fill it with string pattern. Almost the exact same thing. We just had to kind of change it up a bit to be more dynamic and use this in a different format. So if we come in here, we have, this is how you define your schema test. And then you go back to your YAML file. If I can find it. And then I think we were on events. So let me find that event. Oh, we don't have it yet.
Or we can just put it on straight on the source as well.
Oh, that works too. Yeah. On source, ticket tailor, events. I'm just trying to get the right scroll in the screen. And then the next column.
I zoomed in.
Yeah, crazy. But nope. dbt Cloud wants to make sure you can see your results. Oops, I missed the name. So the name is also name. A bit tricky here, but and then
rename that in our staging layer to event name.
The event name, exactly. And then we could add the test. This time you drop the test underscore. So the test underscore is just to let dbt know that this is a schema test. And so now you can just do has underscore prefix. And I believe you have to colon that. My tab's correct. This always trips me up there.
But you don't want the dash because we need to give it a dictionary, not an array. Yeah.
And then what was the variable we called it? I forgot already. String pattern.
Yeah.
Colon. And then, or actually, I don't have to do this anymore. We can just do dbt learn. Colon. So if we save this, I shouldn't get a compilation error. I don't get a compilation error. We can do dbt test -m. And then, do I need to? I think this is the right syntax, right, Claire?
A source colon ticket tailor dot event events.
Nope.
So using the model selection syntax to, rather than run all of our tests, because we might have a huge project with hundreds of tests, being very specific in what thing we're testing. Did it work?
There we go. So we got our unique and not null on the ID, and then we also have our has prefix, ticket tailor, events, name, dbt learn as the prefix that we wanted. If you drop into the details, you'll actually see the same query run. And that looks almost exactly the same as the more naive test that we created earlier. And so this means you can now reuse this same, well, if I can scroll to it properly. No, there we go. You can reuse this same test pattern across your project. Just swap the string pattern prefix that you might like, and then you can run it against your tests in your standard test suite.
Awesome. I think custom schema tests are like such a good skill to learn. And I follow that exact same process of, and like the same for the macro as well, like writing the SQL that does the thing in a non-parameterized way, and then making sure that works, moving it into a macro, parameterizing it so that we can then use it in multiple places. So I think that's a good approach whenever building any kind of macro. Write it the like long way first, and then figure out how you can turn into a reusable piece of code rather than reaching straight for that, like, you know, rather than going straight into building a macro.
Yeah, into full abstractions. And also knowing that if you feel like you're constrained by the current tests, you can make a bajillion more. And yeah. I think some people have done that and also created packages and distributed it to the community.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Cool. Andrew, do you mind if I quickly share my screen? I've got to just quickly get back to the right screen. Andrew, what was your dbt command? Tattoo.
dbt clean. I'm still kind of scandalized at people wanting to tattoo dbt commands to their body, but at least it would say I'm clean if I did have a tattoo.
Incredible. I do dbt source snapshot freshness because I don't think we use it enough, and everyone should. It's fun. Okay, thank you everyone for hanging out with us today. This was our first time at live coding. It might have shown we're going to get better at this, but we would love to hear your feedback on how we can make these sessions better.